Picture this. You're having a normal Tuesday, maybe grabbing coffee or checking social media, when suddenly every phone around you starts screaming with emergency alerts. Sirens are going off everywhere. News reports are talking about a nuclear incident. Your heart starts pounding, your hands shake, and you realize you have no clue what to do next. Here's the truth that separates people who survive nuclear emergencies from those who don't. It's not about luck. It's not about being in the right place. And it's definitely not about waiting for the government to save you. Your survival comes down to what you do in the first few hours when radiation is at its deadliest. The good news is that nuclear survival isn't some impossible challenge that only military experts can handle. It's actually based on simple science and smart decision-making. When you understand how radiation works and what actually protects you, you go from being helpless to being in control. Before we jump into these life-saving strategies, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel gives you real survival knowledge that could literally save your life one day. This is the kind of information you hope you'll never need, but you'll be incredibly thankful to have if something terrible happens. The biggest mistake people make about nuclear emergencies is thinking radiation stays dangerous forever. But here's what will blow your mind. Radiation levels drop incredibly fast, falling to just 1% of their starting strength within 2 days. Which means if you can protect yourself during that short window of maximum danger, you've already won the biggest battle for staying alive. The 3 things that determine whether you live or die around radiation are simple: time, distance, and shielding. Time means every second you're exposed is hurting you, so you want to limit that as much as possible. Distance means the farther you are from radiation, the safer you are. It's like standing next to a campfire versus standing across the yard from it. Shielding means putting heavy stuff between you and the radiation, kind of like hiding behind a thick wall during a paintball fight. Most people think any building will keep them safe, but that's dead wrong. A regular house with wood walls only cuts radiation in half, which might not be enough to save your life. What you really need is heavy, dense materials like concrete, brick, or dirt, creating a barrier between you and the outside world. A basement in a concrete building can cut radiation by 90% or more. If you're outside when something nuclear happens, you've got maybe 10 to 15 minutes before radioactive particles start falling from the sky like deadly snow. Every second you waste being confused or scared is time you can't get back. The moment you think something nuclear has happened, whether you saw a flash, heard an explosion, got an alert, or noticed all the electronics suddenly died, cover your nose and mouth with any piece of cloth you can find. Even a t-shirt wrapped around your face will block about 80% of the dangerous particles you might breathe in. This gives you time to get to better shelter without poisoning your lungs. The first 3 days after a nuclear event are the most dangerous period of your entire life, and your survival depends on understanding one critical rule. You must keep the contaminated outside world completely separate from your clean inside space, because even one mistake can turn your safe shelter into a place that slowly kills everyone inside. The moment you get to any kind of shelter, even if it's not perfect, you have to start decontamination immediately, and this begins with the most important step that most people get totally wrong: taking off every piece of clothing you wore outside before you step into your clean area. This one simple action gets rid of about 90% of the radioactive contamination on your body, because those invisible particles are sitting on your clothes like tiny time bombs waiting to poison the air you breathe. If you have plastic bags, seal those contaminated clothes inside them right away. If you don't have bags, just get those clothes as far from your living space as you can. Whatever you do, don't shake them out or brush them off, because that puts all those particles back into the air where you can breathe them in. After you strip off the contaminated clothes, you need to wash every bit of exposed skin with soap and warm water. Pay special attention to your hair, under your fingernails, and any creases where particles like to hide. But here's something important. Wash thoroughly, but don't scrub so hard that you break your skin, because open cuts can actually let radiation get into your bloodstream. If you don't have much water, wet wipes or damp cloths work too, but always clean from the center of your body outward so you don't spread contamination around. For these 3 days, your shelter is like a bubble in a toxic world. Everything that comes into your space has to be treated as potentially deadly, unless you know for sure it was stored inside before the nuclear event happened. This means anyone who goes outside for any reason has to go through the complete cleaning process every time they come back in. No exceptions, no shortcuts, because one contaminated person can poison your entire group. Building effective radiation protection often means getting creative with whatever materials you can find. And understanding what actually blocks radiation gives you the power to turn ordinary household items into life-saving barriers. Here's something that might surprise you. Water is actually one of the best radiation shields you can use. And just 12 inches of water between you and radiation cuts dangerous rays in half. So if you're in a building with multiple floors, filling the area above your shelter with water from bathtubs, sinks, and any containers you can find creates amazing overhead protection. Even wet towels and soaked blankets work much better than dry ones, because water soaks up radiation while also adding weight and thickness to your barrier. When you're thinking about materials for shielding, heavier is better, but thickness can make up for a lot if you don't have heavy stuff available. 4 feet of wood gives you about the same protection as 1 foot of concrete. So if you have lumber, furniture, or even stacks of books, pile them up thick and tight. Books are actually amazing for blocking radiation, especially those thick textbooks and reference books that are usually just collecting dust. When you stack them together without gaps, they create surprisingly good protection that you can position exactly where you need it most. One smart technique is creating what experts call a radiation shadow, putting dense objects like a car engine, refrigerator, or concrete blocks between yourself and where radiation is most likely coming from. Radiation travels in straight lines like light, so these objects create protected zones where exposure drops dramatically. Radiation also gets weaker with distance, following something called the inverse square law, which means doubling your distance from a radiation source cuts your exposure by 75%. So if you can get to the center of a large building, you're getting protection from distance in all directions at once. When you have multiple rooms to work with, think strategically about creating different zones. Use the most contaminated areas for storage and waste, moderately protected spaces for things like preparing food, and save your most protected area for sleeping and spending most of your time. If possible, try to create positive air pressure in your shelter by using fans to push filtered air inside faster than contaminated air can leak in, while sealing other openings with tape, plastic, or cloth. Protecting your body from radiation goes way beyond just having the right supplies. You need to understand the specific threats and use precise countermeasures that prevent radiation damage from becoming permanent health problems. And honestly, this is especially important with potassium iodide tablets, which most people have heard of, but almost nobody knows how to use correctly when their life depends on it. Potassium iodide protects exactly one part of your body, your thyroid gland, and only against one specific type of radiation called radioactive iodine. But this protection is absolutely critical because your thyroid naturally collects any iodine in your system. And when that iodine is radioactive, it basically turns your thyroid into a radiation source that attacks surrounding tissue for years. The timing of taking potassium iodide is absolutely crucial. You need to take it before exposure or within 3 to 4 hours afterward for maximum protection. Wait 6 hours and you only get half the protection. Wait longer than 24 hours and it's basically useless. Here's the exact dosing that could save your family's lives. Adults need 130 milligrams. Kids between 3 and 18 need 65 milligrams. Toddlers from 1 month to 3 years need 32 milligrams. And babies need just 16 milligrams. If you only have adult tablets, you can break them for smaller doses, but be as accurate as possible because too much iodine causes its own health problems. Something most guides don't tell you is that you might need to take potassium iodide for several days in a row if radioactive iodine keeps being released, which often happens for weeks after nuclear reactor accidents. But stop taking it as soon as the threat passes, because too much iodine over time can mess up your thyroid. For protecting your breathing, you need to understand that radioactive particles come in many different sizes, but the most dangerous ones are usually too small to see with your eyes. Building a good air filter means using layers of different materials to catch different-sized particles. Start with something coarse like window screen to catch big stuff, then move to cotton fabric, then finish with the densest materials you have like denim or thick towels. The best improvised filter uses activated charcoal sandwiched between fabric layers, but most people don't have that sitting around. You can get surprisingly good results using dense fabrics. And here's a key tip. Slightly damp filter materials catch particles much better than completely dry ones. Just don't soak them, because that blocks airflow. You also want to create an entry system with 2 areas if possible. People coming in from outside enter the first area. Remove all contaminated clothes and clean themselves, then enter your clean inner space, which prevents bringing radioactive particles into your main living area. Water security during nuclear emergencies, it changes from a basic need into a complex challenge that determines whether your family stays healthy or slowly gets poisoned. Understanding both water protection and cleaning techniques really gives you the power to maintain safe drinking water, even when public supplies become dangerous. Your first priority, honestly, is securing water that was already protected when the nuclear event happened. Most folks completely miss the huge clean water supply sitting right in their own homes. The hot water heater has between 40 and 80 gallons of perfectly safe water that was stored inside before any radioactive material got into the environment. Getting this water safely requires a specific process. Turn off power to the heater first to prevent heating any contaminated water that might flow back into the system. Close the water inlet valve to keep contaminated city water from mixing with your clean supply. Then use the drain valve at the bottom to get your emergency water out. You should throw away the first few gallons, though, since they might have sediment. Other protected water sources include melted ice from freezers and refrigerators, water from ice machines that were sealed when the event happened, and even the water in toilet tanks. Not the bowl, but the tank, which has several gallons of clean water if it was stored before contamination started. Cleaning potentially contaminated water, well, that requires understanding that boiling kills germs like bacteria, but does absolutely nothing to remove radioactive particles. However, many radioactive materials can be significantly reduced through settling and filtering techniques that work with basic physics. Let suspected contaminated water sit completely still for several hours, and heavier radioactive particles will sink to the bottom, leaving much cleaner water on top that you can carefully pour off without disturbing the contaminated stuff at the bottom. Advanced water cleaning using improvised filters involves layering different materials in a container with drainage. Sand provides mechanical filtering. Activated charcoal, if you have it, absorbs many contaminants. And cloth layers provide the final cleaning step. While this won't remove all radioactive material, it dramatically reduces particle contamination to much safer levels. Here's an advanced technique most guides never mention. Distillation removes virtually all radioactive contamination, except a few specific types. So, if you can set up a distillation system using a pot, some tubing, and a collection container, you can create extremely pure water from even heavily contaminated sources. Food safety works on the principle that radiation contamination mostly affects the outside surfaces rather than getting inside foods, which means canned and packaged food stored inside buildings stay completely safe because radiation can't get through sealed metal or plastic containers. Fresh foods that were exposed to fallout need systematic cleaning. Peeling fruits and vegetables removes most surface contamination, and for meat, removing the outer layer and fat gets rid of most radioactive particles. Dairy products need special caution, though, because cows concentrate certain radioactive materials when they eat contaminated grass and drink contaminated water. Information control during nuclear emergencies, honestly, determines whether you make survival decisions based on accurate intelligence or deadly rumors. Maintaining reliable communication while filtering out panic becomes as critical to your survival as food, water, and shelter. Your smartphone actually becomes a survival tool that most people never realize can provide limited radiation detection through special apps that use the phone's camera sensor to detect radioactive particles. While these apps aren't as precise as professional detectors, they work because radiation creates visible interference on digital camera sensors, giving you the ability to identify relative radiation levels and locate dangerous contamination hotspots around you. Battery conservation becomes absolutely critical when the power goes out, and your communication devices are your lifeline to the outside world. So, you need aggressive power management. Reduce screen brightness to the lowest usable level. Turn off every app and service you don't absolutely need. Use airplane mode when you're not actively communicating, and turn on low power mode if your phone has it. These steps can make a fully charged phone last days instead of hours. Two-way radios provide backup communication when cell phone networks get overloaded or fail completely, And family radio service radios don't need licenses while providing several miles of range under good conditions. Plus, ham radio operators often set up emergency networks during disasters, so monitoring amateur radio frequencies can give you crucial local information that's not available anywhere else. Here's something most people never learn about emergency communication. AM radio signals travel much farther than FM signals, especially at night when atmospheric conditions help signals travel. Emergency agencies often use AM frequencies for official broadcasts, making that old AM radio potentially more valuable than the latest smartphone for getting critical survival information. Internet communication often stays working even when phone networks fail, because they use different infrastructure with built-in backups, and text messages frequently get through when voice calls can't connect, because text needs much less bandwidth and can wait in line for transmission when network capacity becomes available. Social media can provide real-time local intelligence that government sources can't or won't share, but you must verify information through multiple independent sources because rumors, panic, and deliberately false information spread like wildfire during emergencies. Acting on bad information can lead you into greater danger than you started with. NOAA. Weather radio provides official emergency information and weather updates that directly affect how radioactive fallout spreads, because wind speed, direction, rain, and atmospheric conditions determine exactly where contamination goes and how long it stays in the air. So understanding current and predicted weather helps you make smart decisions about shelter timing, evacuation routes, and when it might be safe to go outside. Moving from emergency survival mode into long-term strategic thinking really requires understanding how radiation threats change over time and developing the flexibility to adapt your survival strategy as conditions improve, because the decisions that keep you alive during the first 3 days might actually hurt you if you continue them for 3 weeks. The 7 to 10 rule provides the mathematical foundation for understanding how radiation decreases that could literally save your life. For every 7-fold increase in time since the initial event, radiation levels drop by a factor of 10. That means radiation 49 hours after a nuclear incident falls to about 10% of what it was 7 hours after the event. And this predictable pattern helps you calculate when brief trips outside become relatively safe for essential tasks. Systematic cleaning of your living space must follow smart principles that prevent recontamination while gradually expanding your safe zone, starting with the areas you use most and working methodically from the cleanest spaces toward the most contaminated. Always use damp cleaning materials because dry sweeping or dusting puts settled particles back into the air where they can be breathed in or settle on clean surfaces. Personal belongings need individual assessment based on contamination levels, how hard they are to replace, and how important they are to you. Hard, non-porous items like tools, dishes, and electronics can usually be cleaned effectively using the right techniques, while porous materials like fabric, paper, and unfinished wood hold contamination longer and might need to be thrown away depending on how contaminated they are and how important they are. Evacuation planning involves understanding when leaving your current shelter becomes safer than staying, and while official evacuation orders provide the best guidance when communication works, you need backup decision criteria for when you're operating without official information. Significantly decreased radiation levels measured through your improvised detection methods, structural damage that makes your shelter less protective, running out of critical supplies that can't be safely replaced, or the opportunity to move to a much better shelter location. All of those are reasons to consider evacuation. Resource management during extended isolation can determine whether you survive until help arrives or radiation decreases to safe levels. So, you need precise understanding of minimum survival needs versus comfort preferences. Adults need a minimum of 1 gallon of water daily for drinking and essential cleaning, though survival is possible on less for limited periods. Calorie needs drop to about 1,200 to 1,500 calories per day for short-term survival, though eating more preserves strength and immune system function. Waste management becomes critically important in confined survival situations, because poor sanitation can create disease outbreaks that kill you, even if you successfully avoid radiation exposure. So, human waste should be collected in plastic bags with absorbent material when possible, stored in sealed containers away from living areas, and all trash should be contained to prevent attracting rats, insects, or other disease carriers. Environmental assessment for safe movement requires understanding how local geography and weather affect contamination distribution. Radioactive fallout travels downwind from the source, creating elongated contamination zones rather than circular patterns. Smooth, hard surfaces like pavement collect less fallout than rough textures like grass. Areas that collect rainwater like ditches and low spots concentrate contamination through runoff, and elevated locations may have less ground-level contamination than valleys. So, route planning and timing become essential parts of minimizing exposure during necessary outdoor movement. Nuclear emergencies represent the kind of low-probability, high-consequence events that most people prefer not to think about. But when they do happen, your survival depends entirely on the knowledge, preparation, and clear thinking you developed before the emergency alert started screaming and panic took control of everyone around you. Throughout this comprehensive survival guide, we've explored the critical science behind radiation protection, the practical approaches for creating effective shelter systems, the medical countermeasures that prevent radiation damage, and the long-term strategies for surviving until normal life becomes possible again. But the most important lesson is that nuclear survival isn't about luck or government rescue. It's about understanding that radiation exposure can be managed, controlled, and minimized through smart application of time, distance, and shielding principles. Your survival advantage comes from transformation. Changing from someone who would panic and make deadly mistakes during a nuclear emergency into someone who can think clearly under pressure, make calculated decisions based on science rather than fear, and implement systematic protective measures that dramatically increase your family's chances of surviving with their health intact. Knowledge without action provides no protection whatsoever. So the real test of whether this information will save your life comes down to what you do right now, today, while you're calm and thinking clearly, to prepare yourself with the supplies, plans, and mental frameworks that could mean the difference between thriving and dying when disaster strikes without warning. If this comprehensive survival guide has equipped you with knowledge that could literally save lives, I need you to share this video with every person you care about. Because this information becomes infinitely more valuable when entire families and communities understand these principles, rather than just isolated individuals. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and activate notifications so you never miss the kind of strategic survival content that transforms ordinary people into tactical thinkers who can protect themselves and their loved ones when ordinary systems fail and extraordinary challenges demand extraordinary responses. Because the best time to learn these life-saving techniques is right now, when you have time to think, plan, and prepare, not when emergency alerts are screaming from every device and you're trying to remember what to do while your heart is pounding and precious survival time is slipping away with every second of hesitation.